Hey guys, it's Ben here from the Strength Factory, and in today's episode of Factory Knowledge, I'm going to be talking to you about interval training and specifically how long to take for recovery in between intervals. When to have a short recovery, when to have a long recovery, and most importantly, why. Before we go any further and start talking about the nitty-gritty of effective interval training, I want to tell you two things. Number one, if you've been watching these videos, make sure you hit like, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, send it to some friends and help me to grow this channel, okay? I think I'm doing something a little bit different here in my approach, the on-the-trail practical advice that is usable for a whole range of people, not just the pro athlete who's got all the time in the world to train. First of all then, let's just be really clear about the sort of intervals I'm talking about. Now, at one end of the scale, you've got like your threshold developing stuff, okay? You know, these longer duration intervals at more moderate pace. And then at the other end over here, we've got what I would call your sprint training and maybe sprint repeat. Both of those can be called interval training, but I'm not really worried about those today. What I'm talking about is the stuff in the middle here. And what we're talking about here is like 30 seconds up to maybe 3 or 4 minutes, okay? So real high intensity stuff that's designed to push up the amount of power that you can put out at VO2 max, okay? So a very high percentage of your maximum heart rate. These intervals suck, but they are also super effective at actually making you fitter and faster, which is the whole name of the game. As always though, the devil is in the detail. And whilst I would say that this is actually pretty straightforward stuff, you know, it isn't like big, complicated concepts, so a lot of people are getting it wrong. And where I see people going wrong is that they're not taking long enough rest periods in between their intervals. And so here's what I mean. So when we think about interval training, we're trying to improve a certain physical quality through stressing our body so that your body then adapts after a period of recovery, and then you're fitter. Okay, now this is what a lot of people do. Let's take a 1 minute interval, let's say. So you're going to do 1 minute of really hard work. We're talking like 90-95% effort, okay, even up to 100. And then you're going to take maybe 30 seconds to a minute, like a short recovery period, okay, where you're just pedaling around, or maybe you're just stopped and leant over the bars. And then you go again, and you repeat that maybe 4, 5, even 6 times, and so on. Now what happens here is the first interval is up here. We're putting out good power, the effort is high, and the output is high. So up here, we're working hard enough to get an adaptation. And then we have incomplete recovery in the gap here for a short period, and then the next interval is a bit lower, it's here. And then the next one after that, the recovery is even worse because they accumulate. And then the next interval's here, and the next interval's here. And then before you know it, after 2 or 3 intervals, we're working hard, the heart rate is high, but the output, the number of watts that we're putting out with the legs and the power that we're putting out is low. And so we're not then eliciting that stress on the body that's then going to give us an adaptation to improve your ability to work at those high levels. All you're doing here is you're getting more and more tired, and the quality of your intervals are going down, down, down. You get to the end of the session, you feel like, I'm absolutely nailed, I'm going to be sick, hashtag beast mode, fucking great session. However, it isn't, because you're really tired, it's taken loads out of you, and you're only going to get a moderate fitness gain from doing that session. Let's look at the other way of going about doing this, which is to take longer recovery periods. So let's say we're still going to do a 1 minute interval of hard work at like 90-95+%, and then we're going to take 3 minutes of recovery, okay, to fully recover in between. So our first interval, just like last time, is up here. Happy days, you're working hard. But then we take all of this recovery, and the second interval, bang, it's right there as well. It's up at that same level, give or take just like a few watts or like a little bit of, you know, like a percentage point or two. And then guess what? We take that 3 minute recovery again, and the third interval's up here, and the fourth one is up here, and then maybe we get a little drift off towards the end. But where in the first example with the short, incomplete recovery, the intervals are like a staircase, this is more just a gradual drift off during the session. And the effect on your fitness and your perception of effort is very different between the two. So in the first session, with the short recovery, your feeling of intensity of the session is incredibly high because you spend the whole time breathing out of your ears, okay? So in that sense, the intensity is really high, but the actual intensity of the power output is low, like the average power per interval is low. The second example, you'll get to the end, you're gonna feel worked, you definitely know you worked, but that feeling of a really intense session and wanting to sort of vomit for an hour afterwards is less. And yet, the intensity of the intervals that you've done, and that's what counts, is higher. The average amount of power that you've put out for those series of 1 minute efforts is higher, and that is going to give you an improved adaptation because you put your body under more stress specifically to try and improve your power output of VO2 max. So if I'm going to expand on that point, what normally happens then when I tell people about this and say that you're not taking enough recovery and you're not getting enough good quality intervals is they always chirp up, and rightly so, but racing is high intensity. You don't get full recovery between intervals when you're racing, okay? And even if you're not a racer, even if you just come here, like to the trails at the Forest of Dean, if you're riding hard, linking bits together, then your recovery is incomplete, and I fully agree with that. But what I would say is that whilst we do need to do that short recovery work down the line, what we need to do is develop the quality first. Because a phrase that I've used in these videos before is that you can't repeat what you don't have. So if you start off doing, like repeating VO2 max intervals, 1 minute intervals, okay? So you're repeating those intervals with minimal recovery, but they're no good. You're repeating shit power, okay? Sorry, like it sounds brutal, but if you haven't developed your power at VO2, then all you're doing is repeating an average performance, and you're not even repeating it because it's doing this. Whereas if we can train with long recovery periods, so now you're here, we develop it through long rest periods, and then as the winter and the spring progresses, as we approach racing season, what we can do then, the training becomes more specific. So we've developed the power, and then you need to learn to repeat it, okay? i.e. to go again with limited recovery. So then the next step might be 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, okay? That's a good chunk harder, but it's still probably more effective than doing the really short recovery. And then as we approach the race season, it can be 1 minute on, 1 minute off, or 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And right there, we're getting that race specific work that you need to be really tuned in to really perform for racing, or just to be really fucking fast in the summer, which we all want to do, okay? But you can't repeat what you don't have. So develop the quality first, and then learn to repeat it again and again.
For getting these intervals done effectively is using the lap button and making sure that your computer is set up properly. So in a minute I'm going to hit that button, we're going to do a 1 minute interval. I'm going to use that to start and stop, and you can see there I've got the lap heart rate and also the lap duration, okay? And we can use that for both the work and the recovery. So as I come into this climb, I'm going to give it a tap. Here we go. I'm going for 1 minute. Two, one, lap button. Oh. Now I'm going to try and get back to nasal breathing. It doesn't help. I'm still on a hill. Should have picked a different spot. Well, I haven't been here in a while.
Another thing that you need to think about then is how you go about pacing your intervals. And this is something I've talked about before on a video called Interval Training Out on the Trails, and I'll bang a link to that above me here. Now, the person who gets the most out of the interval session is not the person who goes hardest on the first interval, it's the person who gets the highest average power across all of the intervals, okay? So you've got to pace yourself. If you go mental on the first one, then even with a full recovery, they are going to drop off, okay? Whereas what we want is the opposite, okay? Do the first one at a good, solid level where you're working hard, you're in the zone that you need to be to elicit that change in your body, but you could go a little harder. And then again and again. And then the last 2 or maybe 3 intervals, if you're a bit of a machine, you start cranking it up, crank it up. And that last interval, let's say the 5th 1 minute interval you do, that's where you absolutely bury yourself. You empty the tank as hard as you can until you're completely ruined, like lying on a heap on the floor, okay? Hashtag beast mode, okay? Whatever you want to call it, okay? And that is the way to approach it, because that person who builds the intervals, on average, over those 5 one minute intervals, they've done average more power, okay, than the person who went hard at the start and then drops off. Their average power over the 5 intervals is going to be lower, and so their training effect is therefore going to be lower as well. So that wraps it up nicely then. Like I said, it's pretty simple. At the heart of it is this idea that you shouldn't be trying to repeat something that you haven't already developed. So first of all, develop the physical quality, i.e. that 30-second, that 1 minute, or that 2 minute, or whatever, that power there, with good recovery in between. And that will let you be fresh enough to go hard enough to actually get better, okay? And not just go really hard and get tired, okay? Which is what way too many people and way too many coaches do, and I see it all the time, and it does my head in, okay? Right now, we're coming in, we're autumn, winter, as you can tell by the lovely conditions. So you don't need to be doing those race-specific, like minute on, minute off, or 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off sessions. You just don't need to, okay? Play it smart, play the long game. Think about how fit and how strong you want to be on the bike when the spring comes in 6 months' time. And that starts with being smart with your training. So, if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. As always, I'm open to your input, okay? What's your experience? Am I talking total bollocks? Call me out below. No haters. I just love to get involved and see what you guys think as well. But more importantly, if you did love it, send it to a training buddy, send it to a mate who's doing it wrong, and check out the complete MTB program while you're there, and like and subscribe.